for coming this morning. And I'm sorry I was a little bit late. Actually, I just wanted to say, we should really avoid buying bottled water. The water that comes out of the tap in Toronto is some of the cleanest, best water in the world. A few years ago, it won third prize in a worldwide tasting contest and purity contest and everything, so in France. And you know, every year at Rathiatra, the people from Toronto come with the water, right? and they're actually, that's one of the things they say, is that, you know, they won third prize, you know, so for us to be buying this water is simply a waste of money and polluting the environment with all this plastic. And then there's all the transportation that's required and everything, when the pipes are already there. So we should really, unless we really need to have water out there somewhere in a container, don't buy bottled water. That's just because plastics are really a huge pollution, and we have to look after Mother Bhumi, right? Yeah. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
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 Om Jnanatimirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshuram Militam Dena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Mayam Dadati Swapadantitam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Taparakamam Shri Gurun Vaishnavanscha Shri Rupam Sarvajatam Sahagana Raghunatanvitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Harijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanyavam Shri Radha Krishna Padam Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakamitamscha He Krishna Karna Sindhu Dinabandho Jagapate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Mostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanchakapatubhyascha Kripa Sindhu Yaivacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnaveyo Namo Namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Saraswati Gaura Bhakta Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So how long does this go for? Till 12. Okay. So the title of the talk today is The Real Welfare Work. There are so many different charities in the world. And by nature, Vaishnavas are very charitable. That is one of the qualities of a Vaishnava, is that he is charitable. And the number of things that are wrong in the material world, and everything has a charity. Like there's a charity for the environment, you know, collecting plastic and everything. And there's a charity for cancer, there's a charity for ALS, there's a charity for multiple sclerosis, every disease, and there's so many diseases, and every one of them has a charity. And so sometimes one may think, well, how can I look after all these people, right, that are having all these different suffering conditions? What is is there any way that I can, because my dollar can only go so far, right? We all have a limited amount of earning power, and our dollars can only go so far. So how is it that we're going to help all the people in the world? And even throwing money at all these problems, is it really going to solve the problems? No, no. As you may know, I worked at Sick Children's Hospital, and one of the posters that was always on the wall at Sick Kids said, "Every child a healthy child." That was sort of the motto of Sick Kids, and maybe some of you have seen it yourself. And is that achievable? No, it's not achievable. And there'll always be illness, right? And children are born often with illnesses. And I saw it so often at Sick Children's that children were born with deformed hearts. Even in the womb, they're not forming properly. The heart is not forming properly. And so they come out, and within days of being born, they have to have surgery. And not only one surgery, sometimes they have to go through 3 different surgeries in order for them to be able to live. And even then they say they'll probably only live till they're maybe 25, 30 years old. And then they're going to need a heart transplant. And some of them get heart transplants right at the very beginning. But that means, because the transplanted heart doesn't grow as fast as the regular heart that you're born with. So if a baby gets a transplanted heart, then within a couple of years, they need another heart. And then that heart may last 3 or 4 years, because the growing rate sort of slows down as you get older, right? And but they still need so many hearts. And in fact, I remember I was looking after one boy, and he was going for his 3rd heart transplant. He was 15 years old, and he had been through a lot of pain and suffering, because each heart transplant takes a long time to recover from. And he basically told his parents that I don't want another heart. I can't go through this again, and I just really don't want it. And the parents, of course, were very distraught. They didn't want to lose their child, which is natural. But he just really told them, he said, "I really, really don't want it." Now, at 15 years old, he's at the age where he could make that choice, but not legally. I mean, legally, he's still a guardian of his parents. So if the parents told the doctors, "Go ahead and do it," unless he ran out of the hospital, he would have to go ahead with the surgery. And the parents were really beside themselves, because they didn't want to put their child through suffering, but they also didn't want to put themselves through suffering. I mean, just see how horrible the material world is, right? It's like suffering at every turn. And so these people were really like, what do we do? What do we do? And I happened to see this going on, and they walked out of the room. They were in the hallway, and I just approached them and I said, "Hello," and they said, "Hello." And I said, "Forgive me for asking this, and if you don't want to answer, that's okay," because I felt that it might not be the time and place to bring it up. And I just sort of said, "Are you spiritual at all?" And they said, yes. We believe that there's a spirit inside the body. And I said, okay, so if you truly believe that, then the suffering is not of the spirit, because the spirit lives forever, right? And they went, yes. They understood that. And I mean, almost everybody who believes in God or has an understanding of spirit believes that the spirit is eternal. So really the suffering that's imposed by this material body, as we know from the Bhagavad Gita also, is just due to attachment from this body. So they said, and so I said to them, So, do you really think that keeping him in this body, which is causing him so much difficulty, and having to go through all these artificial things, like having a transplant and going on life support and going through all these trials and tribulations, and there's so much risk. I mean, he could even die during surgery, which happens sometimes. Do you really think that it's worth putting him through that? And they said, no, it's not. And I said, so if you remember that he's an eternal soul, that he is a free spirit, I basically said that, a free spirit, and that he could go on from here, is it best to let that happen? And they went, yes, I believe you're right. Now the doctors, I mean, if the doctors had heard me talking to the parents like that, the doctors would have been like, no, we can save this child. You know, for doctors, death is the enemy, and we're going to conquer death. Of course, no, they can't conquer death, but that's what they think. They think that they can keep everybody alive, and that if anybody dies, it's a failure on their part. But it's not. I mean, that's just life. Life means death. And so the parents went back into the room, and they said to their son, they said, if you really don't want to go through with this surgery, and you really do feel that it's going to be too much suffering, and you know the suffering, I was in there also. I just went in and kind of listened. And they said, and if you think that the suffering that you're going to experience is going to be worse than the suffering that we're going to experience by you being gone, then yeah, go ahead. And he said, you know, as much as I love you, Mom and Dad, I really just can't. I just can't. And they said, okay, it's all right. You're good to go. And they basically told the doctors that he's not going to have the surgery. And he ended up not having a surgery. Interestingly, I didn't see the parents again after that until about 2 years later. I was in the hallway at Sick Children's Hospital, and they called me over and they said, can we talk to you? And I said, yeah, sure. And they said, do you remember us? And oh, yeah, the boy who didn't want the transplant. And they said, yeah, right. And they said, and you know what? Thank you so much for talking to us about that, because we really feel that we did right by our son. And it was unfair of us to put him through that suffering. And they said, but now we are also trying to help in our own way by helping with the transplant program. They help people to sign their donor cards, and they counsel people about transplants, because they had been through 2 transplants already with their own son, so they counsel people who were, their children are going to have transplants, things like that. So I felt, you know, that I'd kind of done a good thing, and I did tell them, you know, I did say to them at that point, I hadn't actually mentioned Krishna before. I had chanted Hare Krishna to their son in the middle of the night when he was sleeping, but I hadn't mentioned it to them. And I did say to them, I said, you know what, you know, this faith and this understanding of the Spirit comes from my involvement with the Hare Krishna movement. And they said, oh, well, that's very nice, you know, and we really appreciate it, because our own religious belief, you know, came up a little bit short, but we're still, I think they were Catholic, and they said, you know, we're still kind of attached to our religion. I said, that's all right. It's not about religion. It's about the Spirit and God. And they totally agreed with that. And so, you know, in this way, there's just so much suffering in the material world, and there's just, people try to alleviate suffering in so many different ways. Everybody tries to alleviate their own suffering, but then those who are charitably minded try to alleviate the suffering of others. And there's only so much you can do, except when you really understand that the soul is completely different from the body. Right? If one has that deep understanding that the soul has nothing to do with the body, that the body is just a temporary manifestation of our rebelliousness, of total surrender to God, to Krishna. That is what the body is. Our body is actually a manifestation of our rebelliousness to God. So, I mean, not that you have to hate your body. You still should look after it in the service of Krishna. But we need to understand that it is a fallible soldier. It is going to get sick. It is going to grow old. And it is going to die. And I've been getting a few notices of that myself. I mean, I'm looking around and I see there's others who are at my age or maybe even a little older, or even the young people who are here. An understanding that this body is really not the self and it is going to grow old and die is essential to really understand that I've got to do something about this. And what can I do? I can develop my own Krishna consciousness. I can actually understand that I'm not this body, that I am a pure spirit soul, and that I have an eternal relationship with Krishna, and that's who I really am. And if we find that out, that is what is called self-realization. Understanding that I am Das, Gopi Bharta Padakanda Lord, Das, Das, Anu Das. I am nothing but the eternal servant of the servant of the servant of the gopis who are the servants of Krishna. And that is the perfection of life. And if we really come to that understanding, we can actually come to the point in this life where the bodily pains and pleasures will not affect us. Right now, we're so much concerned with attaining bodily pleasures, but we don't realize that if you're attached to the pleasures, then automatically you are attached to the displeasure. They're going to come. But if you can get free from, like Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, mantra sparsha stikonteya sitoshna sukadukada agama paine no nityas tams titik shashvavarata. O son of Kunti, the non-permanent appearance of happiness and distress are like the appearance and disappearance of winter and summer seasons. They arise from sense perception only, O Shyana Bharata, and one must learn to tolerate them without being disturbed. So we really get disturbed from distress. But how many people here get disturbed from happiness? Right? Do we consider happiness a disturbance? No. We think it's, hey, I've got something to eat, or I just got, more money in the bank, and I'm enjoying, and I've got a new bed or whatever, whatever way we enjoy, and we think, yeah, this is great, I'm enjoying. But no, it arises from sense perception, and therefore it is a totally limited enjoyment. And it is definitely going to be followed by pain and suffering. That is concomitant with any pleasure in the material world. Is as soon as we go up in the pleasure, then immediately we're going to cruise into the low for the pain. That is concomitant. It's going to happen. There's no way to avoid it. People think that I can avoid it, just like if I get more money, then I can always avoid having a bad situation, because I'll be able to buy myself out of anything. I'll be able to buy food, I'll be able to buy a nice place, I'll be able to buy warmth, I'll be able to buy security, and they just think that if I just have enough money, then I'll be happy. But no, money will never get you true happiness. And it really doesn't even bring you happiness. Everything in the material world that people think that brings you happiness, some people get happiness from that, and some people don't. It's just like intoxication. People think, I'm going to go to the beer store and I'm going to buy a case of 24 beers, and I'm going to drink half of them today and half of them tomorrow, and I'm going to be really happy. And they don't realize that many of them will get sick, and it destroys their body in so many ways. So even if they don't get sick that day, they're preparing themselves to get sick in the future, right? And the same thing happens with money. People think that, oh, if I just have enough money, I will be happy. But I don't know if anybody remembers Howard Hughes. Did you ever hear that name? He used to be one of the richest men in the world. And he owned a Hughes aircraft manufacturing company. And he had, back in, I think it was the 40s, especially, he made aircraft during the war. And then after the war, when commercial aircraft started booming, he was making all kinds of aircraft. He made one of the biggest planes ever, completely out of wood, and he made tons of money. I think his fortune back then was in the billions of dollars, which was huge. I mean, that would be the same as being almost like a trillionaire these days. So he had a lot of money. But as he was getting older, what happened? He started to become paranoid that everybody wanted his money. And he started getting all kinds of security. He bought an entire high-rise apartment building in New York City. I think it was like 40 stories. And the whole thing was empty, except for his penthouse apartment on the top. And he had security and everything, and he never went outside because he was afraid that if he even showed his head, somebody would shoot him or something like that. And then he started getting so paranoid that even he thought that the clothes that were being brought for him and everything couldn't be worn. And so he started walking around his apartment in his underwear. And then as he was getting older and he couldn't control himself, he was wearing diapers apparently around his apartment. Some of the security men say that that's what he ended up doing. And I mean, he was living a horrible life. And he was suffering intensely. And yet he had all the money in the world, practically. So money, the objects of sense gratification do not necessarily give you happiness. They can also give you distress. So if that is the case, then we have to look outside of the world of sense gratification, right? We have to realize that there must be something else. And that question is the essential question, which is the very first Vedic aphorism of the Vedanta Sutra, Atato Brahma Jigyasa. Now in this human form of life, inquire about spiritual life, about Brahma, about spiritual matters. So we have to inquire about those spiritual matters. And so if we are charitable, and if we are thinking that we really want to bring happiness to people, are we going to give them something material? Are we going to give them our money? Nope. There's no use giving anybody money because it's really not going to help them. I mean, Srila Prabhupada, even when he was in India, a couple of times he would walk by and people would be begging and he would say, give them something. And the disciples were like, but Srila Prabhupada. And he said, no, it's all right. We need to give something, perhaps. Best to give them prasad, right? Because everybody needs food. And you may as well give them spiritual food, which is offered to Krishna and actually connects them to Krishna. It furthers their spiritual advancement. So everything that we do, that we give away in charity, should be done with the sense that I want to help this person realize who they are. Help them in the process of self-realization. Help them come to that point of understanding that they are das, amidas. If it wasn't for somebody thinking like that, I would not be sitting here before you today. Right? I mean, I had no understanding. I mean, most of you come from India, and you obviously have a bit of that in your culture. But I did not. I grew up completely outside of that culture. I mean, I was Roman Catholic and I had a religion, but I didn't really understand that the soul was not the body. That's not one of the teachings of the Catholic Church. It's not one of the teachings of the Jewish Church. It's not a teaching of the Muslim faith. It's not a teaching of any faith. So Krishna consciousness is not just another religion. So if somebody asks you, what is your religion? Are you going to say Hindu? No. Because it has nothing to do with Hinduism. I mean, in one sense, it has been described by some devotees that we're simultaneously sort of a Hindu and non-Hindu. Just like we're, simultaneously part of Krishna but not Krishna. Simultaneously one and different. But ultimately, yes, we have nothing to do with being Hindu. That's an upadi. Sarvopadi vinirmuktam tapra vena nirmalam rishikena sevanam bhakta uchite. That in order to engage in devotional service, and by engaging in devotional service, one becomes freed from all upadis, or designations. I'm not white, I'm not black, I'm not brown, I'm not yellow, I'm not Hindu, I'm not Muslim, I'm not Christian, I'm not Jewish, I'm not American, I'm not Canadian, I'm not German, I'm not Russian, not Ukrainian. None of those things, those are all upadis, temporary designations on the soul. But the soul is eternal, spiritual spark of Krishna. But a minute spark that has complete independence. Krishna and the spirit souls, we've been existing eternally, simultaneously, all the time. Never was there a time, the Tvevaham Jatu Nasam, Natvam Me Janadi Pa, Chaivanam Bhavishyama, Sarve Vayama Takparam. Never was there a time that I did not exist. This is Krishna telling Arjuna. So never was there a time that I did not exist, nor you, nor all these kings, nor in the future shall any of us cease to be. So we've been here eternally. Like a lot of people talk about, sometimes even there's a discussion amongst devotees about the origin of the spirit soul, the origin of the jiva. But there is no origin of the jiva. The jiva is eternal, has always been there, and is eternally a servant of the whole of Krishna. And to give people that understanding is the highest welfare work. So I realized that somebody did that for me, and it helped me to become a devotee, and now I'm sitting here speaking to you. And there's so many people out there. In fact, there's one of those Srila Prabhupada said, but it was just a quick thing that I remember hearing a very long time ago, but that there's a Brahmin on every street corner. And they're waiting to be Brahmins. Right now they're not, may not be Brahmins at all. In fact, they may be the lowest of the low, lower than dog eaters, right? Cow eaters, which is even worse. And but by going out there and giving somebody that understanding that they are a spirit soul, and that they can actually lift themselves up to the point of not feeling any suffering at all. But that also means not feeling any material pleasure at all. But what happens is they actually experience a higher taste. Param dristva nivartate. Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita that one has to experience that. Dristva is taste, param is supreme or higher taste. So if you have the param dristva, then you can easily give up all the attachments to material happiness, because you realize that this happiness that I'm having with Krishna is just so much better than any happiness that I experience anywhere else. So sometimes we think that if we've taken a vow to chant japa, and I see a lot of you have japa beads, we think I have to chant my rounds, right? I mean, sometimes you say, oh, Prabhu, sorry, I can't do this service. I have to chant my rounds. And, but we should never be thinking, I mean, always we should be putting aside time so that we make sure our rounds get done, definitely, because we've taken a vow. But we should be thinking that I get to chant my rounds. This is the most wonderful opportunity. I get to sit there with Krishna in the form of his holy name, because the name of Krishna and Krishna are non-different, because it's on the spiritual absolute platform. So we are in touch with Krishna when we are chanting our japa. So just think, I'm sitting there going, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. And Krishna's sitting right beside me, right? You can think like that. Krishna's sitting right beside me going, thank you so much for glorifying me with my holy name. And I'm here for you. He's just sitting there going, I'm here for you. And we should just think like that Krishna is here for us when we're chanting the holy name. And the more we develop that feeling and that understanding that I love the holy name, the Nama Prabhu, that we can actually experience that transcendental happiness, that param drispa, that higher taste. And then we will never, ever be dissatisfied in the material world. Things may happen. One even may get a diagnosis of cancer or whatever. I even found out recently, about 2 weeks ago, I had a CT scan back. They were looking at something in my neck, but they did my head as well, and they found that I've already had a small stroke. I never even knew that I'd had a small stroke. And yet, I think it's just kind of a warning sign. Krishna's going, watch out, I'm coming for you. And so, in this way, there's so many things that can happen to everybody in the material world. But the only way to actually bring happiness to anyone in the material world is to give them Krishna. So, how many were at the temple last night for the reading of the Bhagavad Gita? Was anybody who was here at the temple? Yeah, thank you. It was a wonderful experience. It was really very nice. You know, going through the whole Bhagavad Gita like that. And it was really nice too, actually. I found the alternating between the English and the Sanskrit was really wonderful. It was a really great experience. And because the Bhagavad Gita is just so much spiritual knowledge and really helps us to come out of our shells. You know, you often hear people say of that about somebody who's shy, oh, we've got to get them out of their shell. You know, right? But I mean, now we're spiritually shy and we've got to come out of our shells. We've got to actually manifest our spiritual nature and our charitable nature. And our real charitable nature is to, if you can get books, you know, just like it was described last night, that the goal around the world is 3 million Bhagavad Gitas in this month, which is pretty amazing. That means 100,000 Bhagavad Gitas a day, right? Have to go out. And ISCKON Toronto, with the help of all the other satellite temples, I'm sure, have to distribute 26,000 Bhagavad Gitas. So I really am thinking that this is not a material goal, and it's not really necessarily a great thing that we distribute 26,000 Bhagavad Gitas, but just think of the spiritual benefit that you're giving to every person who gets one of those Gitas. They could end up in 10 years from now sitting on this seat and speaking to you. And it could be a coworker. It could be somebody you meet on the street or on the subway, or your Uber driver or a taxi driver or whatever. There's just so many people that we can give Bhagavad Gita to. And you never know when that spark is going to ignite. It's just like Krishna talks in the Bhagavad Gita about how the spirit soul can land either in the water and become extinguished, or they can land on the earth and they glow for a little while, or they can land in the dry grass and a big fire ignites. So you don't know. Some spirit souls are like in the water, and you give them Krishna, a taste of Krishna consciousness, and they don't ignite. they really don't take to Krishna consciousness. For them, you can try, and you can give them prasadam, because prasadam will help bring them out of the water. And then there's some that will get Krishna consciousness. They will read it for a little while and everything, and they might adopt a few things about Krishna consciousness, but not really ignite. And then there's others who will take to Krishna consciousness, ignite, and just take off with it and become great souls. Right? Manushyanam sahasreshu kaschid yatati siddhe yatatam abhisiddhanam. That's the last line. My brain just went. Anybody know the last line? Anyway, out of many thousands among men, one may endeavor for perfection. And out of thousands of those, hardly one knows me in truth. So we can give out Bhagavad Gita, and it will definitely help people on their spiritual path, because Srila Prabhupada described that if somebody even touches a book, they have made some advancement in spiritual life, because they've come in contact with Krishna. And just by that touching of the book, it guarantees them, as Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, that a little advancement on this path saves one from the greatest fear. And what is the greatest fear? It's going down again in the spiritual evolution, going back down to animal life. So if somebody touches a book and they become, they don't even become Krishna conscious, still, because of that little advancement, you've saved them. And it's guaranteed that in the next life, because they've made a little advancement, they will also get a chance to advance again. They will automatically get a chance to come in contact with the book again. Krishna will arrange that. And then they may take off from there. And we see that sometimes devotees come to Krishna consciousness, and some of them, you just know that they've been devotees in their past lives. They immediately start playing kartals, and some of them start playing mridanga, or very quickly they start, even Westerners start suddenly knowing all these Bhagavad Gita verses and just being really, really good devotees. So it's an advancement lifetime to lifetime. And we have to see the long-term plan, that everybody deserves a touch, a taste of Krishna, and we need to give that out as much as possible. And, really, in this day and age, and we used to do this at Christmas time, in book distribution, we'd actually take out candy canes, and we'd hand people a candy cane, and then we'd say, can you give a donation? They give a donation, we give them a book. Nowadays, it's a little bit different, but you can get candy canes because they're just sugar and water, and you can offer them to Krishna on your altar at home, or you could bring them here and have them offered here. Prabhupada even said that we could offer them on the altar so that they were Mahaprasadam from the deities. And we did that with lollipops and with candy canes. And then everybody can go home with some in your coat pocket, and you can give one to the taxi driver, Uber driver, whatever. And also, if you can, take a few books with you. If you have a purse, just slide in Bhagavad Gita, and you'll give them a candy cane or something. Oh, it's Christmas here, I have a candy cane. Oh, thank you very much, and if somebody seems particularly nice and you only have one book with you, then you can give them that book. And then you've done the highest welfare work. That is the highest welfare work, because that person, due to their advancement in Krishna consciousness, may never have to take birth again. So they'd never get a deformed heart, they would never get any disease, they would never have to grow old, and they would never die again. And that's what everybody's trying to accomplish by all this charity, right? So by giving somebody a book, by giving somebody Krishna consciousness, you've achieved all of that. So that is the greatest gift. So I'll stop there. Thank you very much. If there's any questions or comments, we have a few minutes, I think. Yes.
No, actually, I just wanted to thank the Toronto ISCKON, because I wasn't able to go to the Gita Jayanti yesterday there because I was working. So luckily I had an opportunity to watch from my cell phone the Gita Jayanti while I was working. So the virtual option there is really nice, because I was feeling bad I couldn't come here because it's my long working day on Saturday. So I really enjoyed the program. It was really nice.
Yeah,
Thank you.
That's one of the amazing things. I mean, as Kali Yuga goes down, technology is taking over everything. There are some advantages, and to be able to have, to be able to see the deities and to watch an artique and to see a class and everything right on, and at any time. You can look up any class anywhere in the world, even old classes, from a month ago are often stored different places, or you can even look up classes by Srila Prabhupada on YouTube and everything, and or memories about Prabhupada. I mean, there's just so much access to Krishna consciousness now, which we didn't have. I know when I joined, we only had when I joined, the Bhagavatam was only printed up to 3rd Canto Part 1. That was all the books that were available. And every week or 2 weeks, we would get a 90-minute cassette tapes. Does anybody remember cassette tapes? Yeah. And on one side would be a Srimad Bhagavatam class, and if there was a little time left at the end of the 45 minutes, they would have a bit of a morning walk or a room conversation. And on the other side would be a Bhagavad Gita class by Srila Prabhupada, and then there would be, they would fill up the space at the end with a little bit of a conversation, like a morning walk or something. So that was the extent of the technology in those days. Yeah.
Can you tell me about how we came into Krishna consciousness?
Yeah.
Oh.
Like a little story.
Well, it's kind of a long story, but I can cut it short. I definitely started to realize that, I was a real sense enjoyer, like almost everybody was back in the late 60s and early 70s. And I was going to university, and I was getting intoxicated every weekend and thinking I was having a good time, but there was something missing. I knew that there was something missing here. This is material enjoyment just doesn't last. It's not satisfying. But there's something missing. So I actually took TM at one point, Transcendental Meditation, Maharishi, Mahesh Yogi, and I thought, maybe I found my guru, and I did take it. Didn't really help me that much. I became a little more peaceful and then I became vegetarian, and then I was at the University of Ottawa. I was at McGill for 1 year. And I swam on the swim team, and then my coach went up to Ottawa U, so I went to Ottawa U, and I was in a pre-med program. So I'd done 1 year in pre-med at McGill, and then I did 2 more years at Ottawa U. But towards the end of that 2nd year, I started meeting the devotees on campus. And Balakrishna Prabhu, who is a devotee out in Sharanagati, he was coming up to the campus often and talking about Krishna. And I was, at that point, I had added a couple of artsy classes. And one of them was philosophy, and the other was philosophy of religion. And I was taking those two classes, and I had a lot of questions for Balakrishna, and perfect answers, you know, perfect questions, perfect answers, that book. It was just like that. And I just kept asking these questions, and then I would go back and I would start to talk about those things in my classes, and the teachers were getting kind of interested, and so they would ask me questions that I wouldn't have the answers for. So then I'd go and ask Balakrishna, and he'd give me the answer, and then I'd go give it back. So it was really hearing and chanting. And gradually then I went down to the temple and went to the Sunday feast, and I just started going more often and seeing the kirtan and taking prasadam. It's really funny, when I first went to the temple, many of you may know that, like a lot of devotees, I like sweets. And but the funny thing is, when I first went to the temple, I remember tasting a Simply Wonderful, you know, which is just the milk powder and powdered, you know, yeah. It just, I tasted it and I was like, you know, and now, I mean, if you give me a Simply Wonderful, you know, but, you know, I should control my senses. and I think I am more nowadays. And you just don't see Simply Wonderfuls around as much as you used to. They're a great sweet, though. Anyway, so I just, you know, and one day, all of you know Bhakti Raghava Swami, he and I were coming to the temple around the same time, and then he moved in March of 1974, and I moved in the beginning of April of 74. So I moved into the temple about 3-4 weeks after Maharaj did. And it was, he was the one who sort of said to me, do you like this philosophy? And I said, yes. And do you think it's helped you? And I said, oh yeah, this is definitely the absolute truth. And he said, well, do you think it would be better to stay in the university and learn what you're doing and become a doctor and just help people stay alive? Or do you think it's better to, you know, learn about Krishna consciousness and help people become Krishna conscious? I went, the second one. I want to help people become Krishna conscious. And so I moved in the temple, and you know, we in those days we were just sleeping on the floor. You know, everybody, they told you bring a sleeping bag, and then we just slept in a sleeping bag on the floor. And it was ecstatic. You know, we just every day we just woke up and did everything for Krishna. And I think, in one sense, I was almost more advanced then than I am now. I think there was a lot less in it was a very simple, straightforward life. I was a brahmachari for 2.5 years before I got married to Purnamasi. And mine was an arranged marriage as well, actually, which is unheard of, practically, for a Western person. And somehow or other, our marriage is still going. And we've been married 45 years, and we're still going. So it's, you know, Krishna consciousness is just a wonderful thing. Realizing that Krishna is there with his arm around you saying, I'm here for you, it just gives you complete peace, right? And everybody wants peace. You know, there's, how can, Krishna even says that, and how can there be happiness without peace in the Bhagavad Gita, right?
Can you share with us a fond memory of Srila Prabhupada? I'm sure every day must have been fun.
Well, I mean, because Prabhupada was traveling around, I was not in any of the larger centers, so I didn't really see Srila Prabhupada that often. I mean, I was in Mayapur and Vrindavan in 1976, and I heard. So that was an entire month of being in India, and Prabhupada gave class every single morning. But I never had a conversation with Srila Prabhupada. But I always felt that I was completely protected, and I still feel that I'm completely protected with Srila Prabhupada. Prabhupada was fearless. And when you read about his activities in the Leela Amrita, and then you hear about the memories, Prabhupada could just go anywhere and do anything, and he never, ever was fearful. Ever. I mean, ever. I mean, in the material world, people are fearful all the time. And Prabhupada was never fearful, because he's Abhay Charanaravinda. He's fearless, Abhay, that's his name. And Charanaravinda, he's taken shelter, because he's taken shelter of the lotus feet of Krishna. So that was one of the most amazing things. And if one felt connected to Prabhupada, and if you do feel connected, and anybody, even for grand disciples and great grand disciples, if you feel connected to Srila Prabhupada, and it's so much easier because of the internet and everything to look up Srila Prabhupada, to hear his lectures, and Prabhupada was never ever fearful, and we can become completely fearless by attaining the shelter of Prabhupada's lotus feet, and then we will automatically have the shelter of Krishna's lotus feet. And then our spiritual life is guaranteed. So, I don't know if that answered the question.
Thank you.
I guess time for Arti, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. Take 3 minutes off and give it to somebody else.